The studio lights blazed, turning the bustling set of Morning Talk into a vibrant, almost surreal landscape of primary colors and polished chrome. Stagehands zipped across the floor, their headsets a blur, making last-minute adjustments to cameras and props. The audience, a restless sea of faces, buzzed with an infectious energy, their chatter a low hum beneath the thumping bass of the show's theme music. Then, a voice boomed, rich and theatrical, cutting through the din. "Welcome back, folks, to Morning Talk." Mr. Chuckles, a man whose smile seemed permanently affixed, strode onto the stage, his tailored suit shimmering under the lights. He radiated a practiced charm, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the adoring crowd. "We've got a truly special segment for you today, a segment that will challenge your perceptions, make you wonder, make you laugh, probably." He paused for the expected burst of laughter, which the audience delivered on cue. Beside him, Miss Gabby, all elegance and poise in a sleek magenta dress, offered a more demure smile. "That's right, Mr. Chuckles. We're delving into the extraordinary with a guest who has a tale unlike any other, a story of courage, mystery, and, well, we'll let him tell it." She gestured towards a plush armchair where Arthur sat, small and unassuming, a neatly pressed, albeit slightly faded, veteran's cap clutched in his hands. Arthur, a man etched with the lines of a long life, offered a tentative, almost shy smile to the camera. His eyes, a soft, faded blue, held a quiet depth, a hint of experiences most could only imagine. The studio noise, the glaring lights, the expectant faces, none of it seemed to truly register on his calm demeanor. He simply waited patiently. "Please give a huge Morning Talk welcome to Arthur," Mr. Chuckles boomed, his hand sweeping towards the veteran. The applause was hearty, if a little confused. Arthur gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze before it settled back into a quiet steadfastness. "Arthur, it's an honor to have you," Miss Gabby began, her tone a touch too sweet, a hint of professional skepticism already lurking beneath the surface. "You've come here today to share a story from your time in the war, a story, you say, that has never been fully told." Arthur cleared his throat, his voice a gentle rasp, surprisingly clear despite its age. "Yes, ma'am, it was a different kind of mission. Not like the others." He paused, gathering his thoughts, his gaze drifting beyond the studio, perhaps to a place only he could see. "We were deep in the jungle, you see. A place the maps didn't quite capture. The air was thick, like soup, and the mist never lifted. Mr. Chuckles leaned forward, his grin widening. "A mysterious jungle. Intriguing. And what was this top-secret mission, Arthur?" "To retrieve something they called the Light of the Forest," Arthur explained, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It was vital, they said, for research." Miss Gabby exchanged a quick, amused glance with Mr. Chuckles, a spark of amusement in her eyes. The audience shifted, a few titters echoing through the studio. Arthur, oblivious to their subtle mockery, continued. "The jungle itself was alive, not just with animals, but with a presence. And the plants, we'd walk at night, using only the faintest glow to guide us. There were mushrooms, you see, big as dinner plates, some of them. And they pulsed, a soft, otherworldly light, greens and blues and purples all dancing in the mist." A snort escaped Mr. Chuckles, quickly disguised as a cough. Miss Gabby, however, couldn't quite contain her giggle. It was a delicate sound, quickly stifled, but it hung in the air, sharp and clear. "Glowing mushrooms, Arthur?" Mr. Chuckles asked, his voice dripping with playful incredulity. "Are you sure you weren't perhaps a little dehydrated?" Or maybe you'd stumbled upon a particularly vibrant rave in the rainforest. The audience erupted in laughter, a wave of boisterous amusement that washed over Arthur. He flinched, a slight tremor running through his aged frame. His grip tightened on his cap, his knuckles turning white. The laughter felt like a physical blow, stripping away the dignity he carried so quietly. He looked from Mr. Chuckles's mock-serious face to Miss Gabby's carefully composed, yet still amused expression. The studio lights suddenly seemed harsher, the air thicker with judgment. He swallowed hard, his gaze falling to his hands. "No, sir," he said, his voice a little softer now, a touch of hurt creeping in. "They were real. Every night the forest floor lit up like a starry sky." He looked up, his faded blue eyes meeting the camera, a silent plea for belief in their depths. "We navigated by them. They saved us more than once." Mr. Chuckles's smile never wavered, but his eyes held a glint of something sharper, more cynical. "Well, Arthur, that certainly is. A vivid imagination you've got there, a true storyteller." He winked at the audience, inviting them to join in the light-hearted dismissal. Another ripple of laughter followed, this one louder, more confident. The narrative tension in the room was palpable, a tight coil of skepticism, and Arthur's quiet, unwavering truth. Miss Gabby, watching the audience's reaction, leaned closer to her microphone, ready to deliver her own polished punchline. The stage was set, and Arthur, the unassuming veteran, was quickly becoming the unwitting star of a public spectacle. His story, to them, was just a joke, a bizarre anecdote to fill airtime. But to Arthur it was the truth, as real and tangible as the uniform he once wore, and the laughter, however well-intentioned, was beginning to sting. A furry guide and growing doubts. The fog was so thick, Arthur continued, his voice barely a murmur above the lingering echoes of the audience's previous guffaws. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We were utterly disoriented. No compass readings, nothing. That's when it appeared. Mr. Chuckles leaned forward, a predatory glint in his eye. It? Pray tell, Arthur. What it are we talking about now? A magical pixie, perhaps? A talking badger? His laugh boomed, a theatrical sound that swept through the studio, pulling the audience into its current of amusement. A wave of snickers rippled through the rows, some people wiping tears from their eyes. Arthur, though visibly flinching, pressed on, his gaze fixed on some distant memory. It was a creature, covered in soft brown fur, with large, luminous eyes that seemed to glow in the mist. It stood on two legs, about as tall as my knee, and had these incredibly delicate, almost human-like hands. Miss Gabby, who had been maintaining a picture-perfect smile, raised an elegant eyebrow. "Oh, Arthur," she purred, her tone dripping with mock sympathy, "your imagination is truly something else. Next, you'll be telling us it pulled out a tiny silver flute and led you to a pot of gold." A few in the audience clapped their hands together in delight at her wit, their laughter a sharp, collective jab at Arthur's earnestness. He saw the gleam of the studio lights reflected in the lenses of the television cameras, 1,000 tiny suns burning into his resolve. The air in the studio felt suddenly thin, suffocatingly so. "No flute," Arthur said, his voice now a little firmer, a fragile shield against the onslaught of derision. "It simply gestured. With one of those small hands, it pointed northeast. Then it turned and began to move, a quick, silent scurry into the swirling fog. We had no other choice. Our radios were dead, our maps useless in that terrain, and we were running out of time." Sergeant Miller, bless his soul, just shrugged and said, "Well, lads, anything's better than freezing to death out here." So we followed. He paused, a slight tremor in his hand as he reached for the glass of water. The studio was quieter now, a low hum of anticipation mixed with lingering skepticism. It led us through a winding ravine, a path we never would have found on our own. The mist started to thin as we descended, revealing the entrance to a small cave, almost hidden by overgrown vines. Arthur's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of that old wonder in their depths. Inside, it was dry, surprisingly warm, and on a flat rock in the center there was a map. The words hung in the air, heavy with their perceived absurdity. Mr. Chuckles let out a soft, disbelieving whistle. Miss Gabby's perfectly sculpted smile faltered for a second, replaced by a look of thinly veiled amusement. "A map," Mr. Chuckles repeated slowly, enunciating each syllable as if to savor the ridiculousness. "In a hidden cave, left by a furry creature with delicate hands, I presume? Did it also come with a treasure chest and a riddle, Arthur?" His laughter was no longer contained, a booming, unrestrained sound that filled the studio. The audience roared, a wave of collective mirth washing over them, drowning out any lingering thread of Arthur's story. Some were outright howling, clutching their stomachs. Arthur's shoulders slumped. He looked down at his lap, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. The bright lights of the studio seemed to intensify, burning into his already raw nerves. He could feel the weight of 1,000 mocking eyes, hear the sharp edge of every laugh, every snicker, every whispered joke. The air crackled with their disbelief, a palpable force pushing down on him, trying to crush the truth out of him. He was just an old man telling a far-fetched tale, and they were the world, ready to judge and dismiss. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, the dull throb of humiliation settling deep within him. The map, he thought, the perfectly drawn, intricate map. It had been real, every line, every contour, but how could he ever make them believe? The glowing forest memory. The studio lights blurred, the jeers of the audience a dull roar. Arthur closed his eyes, the memory a cool balm against the hot sting of public humiliation. It wasn't a story. It was a journey etched into his soul, as real as the tremors in his aging hands. He was 8 years old, lost and alone. The chill of the ancient forest had seeped into his bones, but a different kind of light had begun to pierce the encroaching twilight. It pulsed, a soft, ethereal luminescence emanating from the ground, from the very air itself. Then he saw it, a fleeting shadow darting between the enormous moss-covered tree trunks. A creature. It was small, no bigger than a badger, covered in iridescent fur that shimmered with an inner light, its eyes like polished obsidian. Fear warred with an overwhelming, childish curiosity. The creature paused, turning its head, a silent invitation in its gaze. Arthur, his heart a frantic drumbeat against his ribs, took a tentative step. The creature chirped, a sound like tiny bells, and began to move deeper into the strange, glowing woods. He followed, his small legs pumping, twigs snapping under his worn boots. The air grew thick with a sweet, earthy scent, cloying and intoxicating. Towering mushrooms, broader than any oak, glowed with an internal, cool blue light, their caps like polished jade. Smaller fungi in clusters and spirals emitted a softer, amber warmth, illuminating the path with a shifting tapestry of color. The ground itself seemed alive, covered in bioluminescent moss that pulsed gently with every breath of wind. "Wait," he'd called out, his voice a reedy whisper in the vast, silent forest. The creature paused again, tilting its head, its tiny nose twitching. Arthur felt a strange sense of comfort, a primal trust blossoming in his chest. This wasn't a predator, it was a guide. They ventured deeper. The light intensified, turning the darkness into a perpetual twilight. The air grew humid, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ozone, after a lightning strike. Arthur stumbled over a gnarled root, his breath catching in his throat. The creature was instantly beside him, nudging his hand with its warm, furry head. A small, protective growl rumbled from its chest. He reached out, his fingers brushing against its soft fur, feeling a strange energy thrumming beneath his palm. It was real. All of it. The forest hummed with an unseen energy, a chorus of faint, high-pitched clicks and whistles that seemed to emanate from the very fungi themselves. He clutched the rough fabric of his tunic, his knuckles white. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle of unseen leaves sent a jolt of pure terror through him. Yet, the creature padded on, unwavering, its glowing fur a beacon in the mesmerizing chaos. It led him through tunnels formed by giant entwined roots, past waterfalls that shimmered with phosphorescent algae, and across streams where the water itself glowed with an inner radiance. He remembered the fatigue, the constant ache in his muscles, the gnawing hunger. But overriding it all was the sheer wonder, the breathtaking, impossible beauty of it all. He was a small boy in a land of impossible magic, guided by a creature no one would ever believe. The skepticism he faced now was merely an echo of the doubt that had plagued him even then, a fear that this glorious, terrifying journey was a dream from which he would soon wake. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the glowing expanse, and the creature froze, its body rigid. It let out a low, guttural warning sound, its fur bristling. Arthur's heart leaped into his throat. He saw it then, a pair of eyes, large and predatory, reflecting the bioluminescent glow from the depths of a nearby cavern. They were not friendly eyes. The creature nudged him, harder this time, pushing him forward, urging him to run. He understood. He had to keep moving. He had to trust his guide. His small hand reached out, instinctively grasping a handful of the creature's glowing fur, and together they bolted into the shimmering unknown. The memory was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday, a testament to a truth far stranger than fiction. Pity and rock slides. The bright lights of the studio felt less like illumination and more like a spotlight for public dissection. Mr. Chuckles, his face a caricature of concern, leaned into his microphone. "Arthur, with all due respect, and I truly mean that, are you absolutely certain you weren't dreaming, perhaps a vivid dream brought on by the trauma of the situation?" Arthur met his gaze, unflinching. The polite skepticism in Mr. Chuckles's voice was a thin veil over outright disbelief. "No dream, Mr. Chuckles. It was real. As real as this studio, as real as the cameras pointed at me." Miss Gabby, perched on the edge of her seat, offered a tight, pitying smile. "Arthur, darling, we understand that sometimes the mind plays tricks in high-stress environments. It's a very common human response. Perhaps you were delirious, dehydrated." Her tone dripped with condescension, a gentle pat on the head for the confused old man. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the studio audience. Heads shook subtly. Some offered sympathetic, yet clearly dismissive expressions. The pity in their eyes was a different kind of humiliation, less sharp than ridicule, but far more insidious. It was the look reserved for those whose faculties were clearly failing, for stories too outlandish to be anything but delusion. Arthur saw it in the faces of the crew, in the hushed whispers of the producers in the wings. He was a curiosity, a spectacle, a man to be humored until his segment was over. "I was not dreaming, nor was I delirious," Arthur stated, his voice gaining a quiet intensity that cut through the low hum of the room. "I was awake, and I was terrified, and I was very much aware." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces that pitied him. "The ground started to rumble, a deep growl that vibrated through my very bones, and then it started. A whole section of the cliff face just gave way, Dust erupted, a choking cloud of pulverized rock, and boulders the size of small cars began to tumble down the slope. He described the sheer heart-stopping terror of the moment, the deafening roar as stone scraped against stone, the scent of crushed earth filling the air. He recounted how he'd instinctively flattened himself against a small outcrop, praying the deluge of rock would pass him by. And then, Arthur continued, his voice dropping slightly, when the worst of it seemed to be over, when the dust was beginning to settle, I saw them, darting among the smaller debris, scuttling around the still shifting ground. He leaned forward, his eyes alight with a conviction that defied the pitying stares. They were furry, about the size of a badger, with bright, intelligent eyes. And they weren't just running from the slide. They were helping. Miss Gabby's polite smile faltered. Mr. Chuckles' brow furrowed, a flicker of something beyond skepticism, perhaps exasperation, crossing his features. Helping, Arthur, Mr. Chuckles prodded, a hint of a chuckle already forming in his throat. Yes, helping, Arthur affirmed, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. They were nudging smaller rocks with their snouts, pushing them clear. I saw one, no bigger than my forearm, actually brace itself against a larger stone that was threatening to roll onto a trapped sapling. It held it for a moment, just long enough for another of its kind to burrow beneath the sapling and free its roots. He painted a vivid picture. The frantic, coordinated movements, the surprising strength, the sheer, undeniable intent in their actions. He described how one of the creatures, its fur a dappled brown and gray, had looked directly at him, its gaze holding a spark of ancient wisdom before it scurried off to join its brethren. The words hung in the air, a surreal tableau of furry creatures engaged in emergency rockslide management. And then it broke, a single titter from the back of the audience, quickly joined by another and another. Soon the entire studio erupted in outright laughter. It wasn't the polite, nervous laughter of a show finding its footing. It was a genuine, unrestrained peal of amusement, the kind reserved for truly absurd punchlines. Miss Gabby threw her head back, her laugh a tinkling cascade that punctuated the general mirth. Mr. Chuckles, though attempting to maintain a semblance of professional decorum, couldn't quite stifle the snorts that escaped him. He clapped a hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. The sound washed over Arthur, a tidal wave of ridicule, leaving him exposed and raw under the harsh studio lights. He remained silent, watching them laugh, his conviction unwavering, but a deep, familiar ache began to settle in his chest. The ache of being unheard, of being dismissed, the ache of pity. The call that silenced the room, the studio lights glinted off the polished surface of the desk, illuminating Mr. Chuckles' widening grin. Beside him, Miss Gabby dabbed at a tear of mirth, her earlier pretense of polite skepticism long abandoned. Arthur, unyielding in his seat, watched the tide of ridicule wash over him, his face a weathered mask of conviction. The audience, a ravenous beast of laughter, roared its approval as Mr. Chuckles mimed flapping arms, mimicking Arthur's description of the winged folk who had supposedly saved him from the rockslide. So, these creatures, Mr. Chuckles gasped between chuckles. They just zipped in, cleared the debris, and then, what? Gave you a pat on the back and a gold star? Miss Gabby chimed in, her voice dripping with condescending pity. Perhaps it was the trauma, dear. A vivid dream, a coping mechanism for such a terrifying event. She gestured vaguely, as if dismissing a fly. The audience guffawed, a wave of sound that threatened to drown out Arthur's quiet dignity. He simply shook his head, his gaze steady, unwavering. It was no dream. They were real, and they were good. Just as Mr. Chuckles wound up for another witty barb, a bright, garish graphic flashed across the monitors. Viewer call-in. The studio audience let out a collective cheer, anticipating another jibe, another voice joining the chorus of mockery. Mr. Chuckle's eyes twinkled with delight. Ha! A brave soul dares to challenge the master of absurd tales. Let's see what wisdom our viewers have to impart. He pressed a button, a smirk playing on his lips. You're on the air, my friend. What's your take on Arthur's extraordinary rockslide rescue? A brief, almost imperceptible hiss of static filled the studio, a moment of dead air that only amplified the expectant silence from the audience. Then a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the air. It wasn't the falsetto of a prank caller or the nervous stammer of a bewildered fan. It was a voice that commanded attention, a voice forged in steel and tempered by command. This is General Elias Iron. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The studio, which a moment before had been a cacophony of mirth, fell into an abrupt, stunned silence. The laughter died in a choked gasp. Mr. Chuckle's smirk dissolved, replaced by an expression of open-mouthed disbelief. Miss Gabby's hand, poised to cover another giggle, froze in midair. The entire studio audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. General Elias Iron. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history, with decorated valor, with unquestionable authority. He was a living legend, a decorated hero whose face was as familiar as the national anthem. To hear his voice, unannounced, on a daytime talk show, was akin to the earth itself pausing. General Iron, Mr. Chuckles stammered, his voice suddenly small and reedy. To what do we owe the unexpected honor? He fumbled with the controls, his earlier confidence utterly shattered. General Iron's voice, devoid of humor, resonated with an unshakable certainty that vibrated through the very air. I heard Mr. Caldwell's account, and I'm calling to confirm it. A collective gasp swept through the audience, a wave of astonishment that rippled through the studio. Arthur, for the first time, allowed a flicker of something akin to relief to cross his face. His gaze met the camera, not with triumph, but with a quiet, knowing vindication. Confirm? What, sir? Miss Gabby whispered, her face pale, her earlier condescension wiped clean. Confirm the winged folk, the rock slide, the rescue, General Iron stated, his voice unwavering. I was there. Not at that rock slide, of course. But I encountered them myself 30 years ago, during the Ethel campaign. They saved my men. They saved me. The words hung in the air, undeniable, irrefutable. The studio, once a den of mockery, had been silenced by the unimpeachable truth. General Iron's validation, General Iron's voice, raspy yet firm, cut through the studio's canned laughter like a laser through glass. Arthur's story is true, every word. The declaration hung in the air, thick and impossible. Mr. Chuckles, mid-guffaw, froze. His rictus of amusement morphed into a slack-jawed stare. Miss Gabby, who had been flicking her wrist in a dismissive gesture, dropped her hand as if it had suddenly turned to lead. The studio audience, a cacophony of snickers and whispers moments before, fell into a profound, almost eerie silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the stage lights. Arthur, who had braced himself for another wave of derision, blinked. A faint tremor ran through his hands, but his gaze remained fixed on the monitor displaying General Iron's stern, lined face. A flicker of something, relief, vindication, a fragile hope ignited in his eyes. I was on that mission, General Iron continued, his voice echoing slightly through the studio speakers. The glowing mushrooms Arthur described, we called them lumiflora. They pulsed with a bioluminescent light, just as he said, illuminating the tunnels in an unearthly green glow, essential for navigating those subterranean labyrinths. Mr. Chuckles' face, usually flushed with an easygoing confidence, now drained of color. His perfectly coiffed hair suddenly seemed less immaculately styled, more like a startled bird's nest. He opened his mouth, then closed it, no sound emerging. Miss Gabby, her usual animated expressions replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief, clutched the armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. And the creatures, General Iron pressed on, oblivious to the studio's unraveling composure. The furry, bipedal beings with the large eyes. We codenamed them Glimmers. They were highly intelligent, surprisingly agile for their size, and yes, they communicated through a series of chirps and clicks, just as Arthur detailed. They were invaluable, acting as guides through terrain impassable to our conventional reconnaissance units. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Smiles had vanished entirely, replaced by open mouths and wide, incredulous eyes. The boisterous energy that had filled the room had evaporated, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere of shock. One woman in the front row, who had been particularly vocal in her skepticism, now covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting between Arthur and the monitor. And the map, General Iron concluded, his gaze seeming to pierce directly through the screen. The one Arthur mentioned, drawn on a piece of hide. It was a strategic asset, showing ancient pathways and hidden caches known only to the Glimmers. Arthur was the one who painstakingly transcribed it, deciphering their unique pictographic language. Without his dedication to that task, many lives would have been lost. The silence that followed this final confirmation was absolute, save for the frantic whispers that began to break out among the audience, growing in volume as the enormity of what they were hearing sank in. Heads swiveled between Arthur, now sitting a little taller, and the stunned faces of the hosts. Mr. Chuckles finally found his voice, a strangled, barely audible croak. General Iron, are you saying? General Iron's expression remained unyielding. I am saying that Arthur's account, which many of you have so readily dismissed as fantasy, is a first-hand recollection of a mission that pushed the boundaries of human endurance and ingenuity. He is not a fantasist, nor a madman. He is a hero, and he has spoken nothing but the truth. The camera zoomed in on Arthur. His eyes, though still moist with an unshed tear, now held a fierce, quiet dignity. The weight of years of silent ridicule, of being disbelieved, was visibly lifting from his shoulders. He met the camera's gaze, then looked directly at Mr. Chuckles and Miss Gabby, who now sat frozen, their faces pale, their earlier condescension replaced by a dawning, terrible realization. The studio, which had been a crucible of public humiliation for Arthur, was now transformed, in a single, breathtaking instant, into a stage for his validation. Comrades in the cave. The cave's breath, thick with the damp perfume of earth and a subtle musk, enveloped young Arthur. His knuckles, stark white against the rough stone, betrayed the tremble he fought to master. Beside him, a younger, leaner General Iron grunted, his face streaked with grit and resolve. The echo of the rock slide had only just died, leaving a stifling hush, pierced solely by the frantic chirps and whimpers of the small, furry beings trapped deeper within. This way, Arthur. Iron's voice, even then a beacon of authority, sliced through the persistent ringing in Arthur's ears. We need to clear this path. The little ones are getting crushed. Arthur swallowed hard, nodding. The sheer scale of the shifted rock loomed. A colossal slab, the girth of a modest cart, choked the main passage, its jagged edges malevolently catching the flickers of Iron's crude torch. Around them, the furry creatures, no larger than house cats but with strikingly intelligent, wide eyes, flitted nervously, some futilely clawing at smaller debris. On three, Iron commanded, planting his feet, shoulders tensing. Together, Arthur mirrored his stance, bracing. He felt the gaze of the trapped creatures, a silent plea that ignited a spark of resolve within his chest. He wasn't just aiding Iron, he was their champion. 1, 2, 3. They heaved, muscles shrieked. The rock barely budged, a grinding scrape that mocked their efforts. Despair threatened to consume Arthur. It was insurmountable. Then a flurry at their feet. Dozens of the furry creatures, as if grasping the task, swarmed the rock's base. They pressed their tiny bodies against the stone, pushing, miniature claws scrabbling for purchase. It was a remarkable tableau of innate intelligence and collective will. Their combined effort, though individually minuscule, added a crucial increment of force. Again, Iron roared, sweat plastering dark hair to his forehead. "They're helping. We can do this." Arthur, fueled by this unexpected alliance, found a renewed surge of strength. He pushed harder, grunting, the rock's sharp edges biting into his palms. The sheer impossibility receded, replaced by fierce determination. He felt the rock groan, a deeper, more promising sound this time. "It's moving," Arthur gasped, his voice raw. Indeed, the colossal slab began to yield, inch by painstaking inch, a testament to the combined might of man and creature. The furry beings chittered excitedly, pushing with fresh vigor. Arthur risked a glance at Iron, whose face was a mask of strained effort, yet his eyes held a glimmer of triumph. They were comrades, in a true sense, bound by shared crisis and a common objective. Finally, with a loud, grating scrape that reverberated through the confined space, the rock shifted enough to create a narrow passage. A surge of the trapped creatures immediately darted through the gap, their joyful chirps filling the air. Iron leaned against the cleared rock, chest heaving, a genuine smile breaking through the dirt and grime. "Well done, Arthur. Very well done." Arthur, equally winded, offered a shaky smile in return. His muscles ached, his hands throbbed, but a profound sense of accomplishment warmed him. He had confronted fear, faced an insurmountable obstacle, and with the help of an unexpected ally, he had triumphed. He looked at the furry creatures, now scampering freely, their wide, intelligent eyes seemingly expressing gratitude. He looked at Iron, a man who saw past his youth and inexperience to recognize a comrade. This shared experience, this moment of desperate teamwork and quiet victory, forged a bond that would endure for decades, transcending the ridicule and doubt of the intervening years. It was a memory etched deeply, undeniably real. The flashback receded, leaving Arthur standing in the sterile glare of the studio lights, a profound sense of vindication washing over him. General Iron's words, echoing through the speaker, had not only confirmed his story, but had laid bare the truth of their shared past, validating every terrifying, miraculous detail. The silence in the studio was absolute, heavy with the weight of revelation. The laughter had died. The skepticism had crumbled. All that remained was the irrefutable truth, spoken by a voice that commanded respect, confirming the impossible had indeed happened. Shame, respect, and an apology. The applause, which had moments ago been a mocking cacophony, now held a bewildered, hesitant quality. On the oversized screen behind Mr. Chuckles and Miss Gabby, General Iron's face, etched with the wisdom of 1,000 campaigns, beamed. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the studio, silencing the last vestiges of tittering. "Arthur Sterling," the general began, his gaze seemingly piercing through the camera lens, "is a hero in the truest sense of the word. His actions that day, under the most harrowing conditions, were nothing short of extraordinary. The map he found, lodged beneath that rock, was pivotal. It contained the exact coordinates of the enemy's hidden fuel depot, intelligence that allowed us to launch a preemptive strike. saving countless lives and fundamentally altering the course of that particular offensive. A collective gasp rippled through the studio audience. The previous boisterousness had evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. Head swiveled from the screen to Arthur, then back again, as if trying to reconcile the frail man before them with the monumental praise echoing through the room. Arthur, for his part, sat taller in his chair. A quiet pride bloomed in his chest, warm and unfamiliar after so many years of dismissive stares. He met the general's gaze, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, a shared memory of dust, sweat, and the heavy weight of duty. He'd known it, of course, had always known the truth of his story, but to hear it validated so publicly by such an esteemed figure was a balm to old wounds. Mr. Chuckles's perpetually jovial expression had disintegrated. His face, usually a canvas for exaggerated mirth, was now a fiery crimson, spreading from his neck up to his thinning hairline. His usually quick wit seemed to have deserted him. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. The vibrant hues of his suit suddenly seemed garish, clashing with the profound shade of his embarrassment. Beside him, Miss Gabby's perfectly made-up face paled, then flushed a blotchy, uneven red. Her dismissive smirk had contorted into an expression of abject shock, her wide eyes darting nervously between Arthur and the silent, judging faces of the audience. The carefully constructed facade of sophisticated amusement she usually wore had crumbled, revealing a raw, unvarnished mortification. The glittering earrings she wore seemed to mock her sudden inability to articulate a single coherent thought. The whispers began, soft at first, then growing in volume, a murmur of amazement and regret. "He really did it," someone breathed from the third row. "They mocked him," another voice hissed, carrying a note of accusation. The audience, so quick to laugh, was now quick to judge the very people who had led them down that path. The air in the studio, previously charged with derision, now crackled with a palpable sense of collective realization and shame. General Irons' voice continued. Arthur's courage, his sheer determination to move that rock, a feat I witnessed myself, was an act of pure heroism. He didn't just move a stone, he moved mountains for his country. The general's final words hung in the air, a profound indictment of the show's earlier skepticism. Mr. Chuckles finally found his voice, though it was a mere shadow of his usual booming baritone. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his gaze fixed on the polished studio floor, unable to meet Arthur's eyes. The usual theatricality was gone, replaced by a genuine tremor. I am truly, deeply sorry. My skepticism, my mockery, it was unforgivable. I offer you my most sincere apologies." His words were soft, almost swallowed by the sudden quiet of the studio. Miss Gabby, her voice barely above a whisper, added, "Mr. Sterling, please forgive me. I was disrespectful. I judged you unfairly. There are no words sufficient to express my regret for my behavior tonight." Her carefully modulated tones were replaced by an earnestness that was startling in its sincerity. She even reached out a hand, a hesitant gesture towards Arthur, then withdrew it, as if afraid to impose further. Arthur looked at them, at the two figures who had so gleefully dismantled his credibility just moments ago. He saw not the sneering hosts, but two people profoundly humbled, their public personas stripped away by undeniable truth. A complex mix of emotion swirled within him. Vindication, yes, but also a strange, quiet pity. He simply nodded, a small, dignified gesture that spoke volumes. The apology, he knew, was not just for him, but for every veteran whose stories had been dismissed, whose sacrifices had been forgotten. The shift in the room was complete. The shame of the hosts had been transmuted into the genuine respect of the audience, and in that moment Arthur Sterling felt truly seen, a hero. Recognized the studio lights, once harsh and unforgiving, now seemed to soften, bathing Arthur in a warm, almost reverent glow. The silence that had descended with General Iron's booming voice was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the cameras. Mr. Chuckles stood rigid, his usually boisterous face drained of all color, his trademark grin replaced by a gaping maw of mortification. Miss Gabby, her sophisticated amusement having evaporated into thin air, clasped her hands to her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The audience, moments ago a cacophony of snickers and derisive laughter, was utterly still, each person caught in the powerful wake of the General's words. General Iron's voice, though transmitted through a telephone line, filled the studio with an undeniable authority. "Arthur," he repeated, his tone gentler this time, "I never forgot that day, not for a single moment. You saved us all. You saved me." Arthur felt a tremor run through him, not of fear, but of an overwhelming, long-suppressed emotion. His gaze, which had been fixed on some distant point, now sought out the camera, as if he could see the General through the lens. A slow smile spread across his weathered face, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes, making them glisten with unshed tears. For decades, he had carried the weight of that day, not just the physical strain of the impossible feat, but the heavier burden of disbelief, of being dismissed as a senile old man spinning tall tales. Now, in this public forum, with the entire world watching, his truth was not just acknowledged, it was celebrated by the very man whose life he had saved. He felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet vindication that settled deep in his bones. "General," Arthur murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "it was my duty." "Duty? Yes," General Iron chuckled, a sound that was warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the mocking laughter that had filled the studio moments before. "But it was more than duty, Arthur. It was courage. It was strength beyond measure. It was the act of a true hero." The weight of the General's words hung in the air, transforming the atmosphere of the studio entirely. The vibrant red on-air light seemed to pulse with newfound significance. Mr. Chuckles, finding his voice at last, cleared his throat, a small, choked sound. "General Iron," he stammered, his eyes darting between the camera and Arthur, we are profoundly sorry, on behalf of the show and myself, for the disrespect shown." His usual jovial demeanor had completely crumbled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Miss Gabby, equally chastened, leaned into her microphone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Arthur, we owe you an immense apology. Our skepticism was inexcusable. Your story, your heroism, it is truly incredible." The refined amusement that had always seemed to cling to her like an expensive perfume had vanished, replaced by genuine remorse. The studio audience, having been swept along by the General's unwavering testimony and the host's profound contrition, began to stir. A single clap, tentative at first, then another, quickly blossomed into a thunderous ovation. It wasn't the polite applause of a captivated audience, but the heartfelt, booming appreciation of people who had witnessed something truly extraordinary and had been profoundly moved by it. Arthur stood up straight, his shoulders back, his gaze unwavering. He was no longer the frail, easily dismissed old man. He was a veteran, a hero, a man whose incredible strength and courage had been validated for all to see. The years of quiet suffering, the internal battle against the doubt of others, all of it seemed to dissolve in the overwhelming roar of the crowd. The clapping grew louder, longer, a wave of sound that washed over him, cleansing away the lingering sting of mockery. People were rising from their seats, their faces etched with admiration. Some wiped away tears, others simply stared, awestruck. The initial boisterousness and quick amusement of the crowd had given way to a deep, resonant respect. Arthur looked out at them, seeing not the jeering faces from earlier, but a sea of humanity. Finally understanding, he offered a small, dignified nod, a gesture that conveyed both gratitude and a quiet pride. The camera lingered on his face, capturing the profound sense of peace that now radiated from him. He had faced down an impossible obstacle on a battlefield many decades ago, and today he had faced down an equally formidable foe, public skepticism. And in both instances, he had emerged victorious. He was Arthur, a man who had moved a mountain literally, and now he stood tall, a hero recognized.